And on stage today, we have with us Perri Peltz, who's an award-winning documentary filmmaker, journalist, health advocate, and I could go on and on, but you have her resume. And we have three of our great laureates. But right before I turn it over to Perri, we have a very short clip that we want to watch.
My mom used to always encourage me to ask why. Why couldn't we help each other to succeed? I think I'm still asking why.
I think each of us, at the end of the day, want to feel like we have done something that has made a difference.
We couldn't wait. We had to start something.
For me, leadership is about taking people to a better place that they wouldn't have gone to on their own.
If we don't do this, we're not sure anyone else will.
For me, it's much more than a job, than an initiative or a project. Is my call.
We're looking at a very human level, impacting individual lives.
I can't imagine a higher calling.
When you show that the impossible is possible, you inspire people to take further action.
We are all bound to each other. We are a part of a common humanity.
Welcome, everybody. We are so glad that you could spend this lunch hour with us. I look at this video, I have read about our three panelists and talked to them, and I know that if I could count the number of times I've thought, I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing, I'm going to go change the world and make a difference, it's never gone beyond that. It has only remained a thought. Inertia seems to be my guiding principle, but happily, it is not for the three people who sit on this stage with me, and I'm so honored to be here with all three of you and to let everybody here with us today hear your incredible stories. I'm going to briefly introduce everybody and then give them an opportunity to talk about the work that they're doing, and then we're going to turn it over after a few questions to you, so prepare your questions and let's begin. So let me begin on my left. Casey Hardin is the co-founder and the CEO of Conservatorio, a real estate development company that is dedicated to sustainable revitalization in Latin America. Casey is also, though, the co-founder of Esperanza, and you're going to hear all about that. Esperanza is a gang reintegration program. And sitting next to Casey is Nicola Galombik. Nicola, is the executive director of Yellowwoods. It's a global holding company with stakes in many businesses. And Nicola recognized that South Africa businesses have a major role to play in addressing the crisis of youth unemployment. And to Nicola's left is Dele Olojede. I got the J. Dele was the foreign editor at New York Newsday. Dele is the first African Pulitzer Prize winner, which he received in 2005 for a series that he did on the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide. Then Dele went back to Nigeria and started an anti-corruption newspaper called Next. Those are the brief introductions, and I want to begin, Casey, with you. You're a real estate developer in Panama City. Talk to us, though, about what the gang rehabilitation organization that you started, Esperanza. Tell us what it is and what it does.
So the context that we work in, the real estate development context, is revitalizing severely deteriorated parts of the downtown areas of cities in Central America, and principally Panama. And in these areas, one of the big problems you find, one of the big challenges to their development and to any of the social development or the economic development of these areas is gangs. There's a lot of gang violence. So in looking for a solution that was sustainable to that problem, we developed Esperanza. We developed a program and now a foundation, which the unique thing about Esperanza, there's a lot of programs that work with gangs around the world, and there's a lot of approaches. What we found was that gangs, these guys are highly marginalized. They really work, they are family. They actually don't really have much else besides their fellow gang members. So it's possible, if the leadership wants to change, to pivot the entire gang, the entire structure from antisocial orientation. You know, the difference between the gang and the Kiwanis is that the gang orients themselves towards crime. Other than that, they're exactly the Kiwanis. So we help the leadership when they're ready to pivot to pro-social activities, and that's through training and entrepreneurship and job placement and community outreach, and we try to get them integrated in the community and give them a place so that they can be positive members of the community.
Explain just a little bit, Casey, if you can, just how bad the gang problem is, because I think it's different than it is here in the United States.
Right, so I think it's important to remember that there's gangs and then there's organized crime, and they're two very different things. Street gangs are a very localized phenomenon, very marginalized guys. They get together and they do tattoos and they have all the things that you associate with a gang member. They look like gang members, but they're maybe loosely affiliated to other gangs. They're not highly sophisticated criminal organizations, multinational criminal organization networks. Once they get to that point, the type of thing we do, it's a police problem. At the stage when they're still localized and they're still focused on a territory and not letting other gangs come in and they're at war with gangs, which is most of what you find, and most of the gangs you've heard of, that's what they are. There's still time to work with them, we found.
Nicola, let's move on to you, because what I didn't know before I read about your work is that youth unemployment in South Africa, 3rd highest in the world? Mm-hmm. That's incredible. Tell me what you're doing to take on which is an enormous problem.
So we are in a situation where we have a growing economy, which needs young people with skills and entrepreneurial energy. We have a huge part of our young population who are effectively locked out of the economy. And they're locked out of the economy partly because of poor education, but actually more so because of social networks, being in poor families that don't have networks into the economy, and not having the confidence to really catapult themselves, to present themselves, and to succeed, and also not having the acculturation, actually, the socialization to succeed in the world of work. So, that is a kind of a national problem of significant proportions in South Africa. I have to say that in the 6 years that we've been focusing on this issue, I think it has become a global tsunami. And I think that we are actually ahead of the curve in a way on dealing with this question of how this generation of young people are going to find their way into the economy and feel socially included. So what we've done is establish a youth employment accelerator, we call it, which transitions young people from poor families into the economy. It creates pathways for them into the economy by finding new ways to judge their potential and changing the practice of employers in judging their potential, and also providing them with pathways and opportunities to upgrade their employability and upgrade the skills they need just to get the job and keep the job. And then we believe that work can be their next university. So we are not talking about graduates, we're often talking about school leavers. And we started about 6 years ago. We've worked in a very collaborative way with many organizations. We set up a system-wide solution rather than a firm-based solution. And today we have 300,000 young people in our network.
Oh my gosh.
And we have placed 37,000 of those into full-time employment.
That's incredible. Really incredible. Dele, if you can, talk to us a little bit about corruption in the media, in the press in Nigeria, and how you took that issue on.
Well, I mean, it wasn't so much corruption in the media as corruption being so all-pervasive in the country, which had stunted the country and created enormous suffering and mass immiseration. And once you see that there is such a wide gap between the potential of a society to grow in an healthy fashion and the sheer brokenness of what was staring you in the face, then the answer became easy for you as to whether you would do something about it. So Nigeria is one of those countries that, to use the word infernally corrupt, is not an exaggeration. And so what we try to do with Next, one, just to reassure people that it was possible to build something in that environment that was completely impervious to corruption, so that hopefully it will give confidence to others to also attempt to do the same thing. But more importantly, to allow the Nigerian citizens to fully understand the scale of the challenges that they were facing, the scale of the sheer human suffering that was prevalent in Nigeria, and to figure out ways to solve them. Because if you had a media that was susceptible to such large-scale bribery, then it meant that people were controlling what got published, what got introduced into the public arena, and what got left out. So we removed that. And obviously that created all kinds of tensions and pushbacks and so on, but that's another story. So, but that was really the mission. And I felt, of course, that that was the one area that I felt reasonably confident that I could make an impact on a society that had such extraordinary potential for a decent existence for humans, and which was failing rather dramatically at achieving it.
Well, let's work backwards now. If we're talking about the moral imperative to act, Dele, let me ask you, why, I mean, you had a great job. You were working as the foreign editor at Newsday, you know, doing great stories. You won a Pulitzer. Why? Why make this next step, go back to Nigeria, and start something that really sounds, from what I understand, was going against all odds?
Yeah.
What did you wake up one day and say, I'm going to do this?
It's yes and no. I mean,
but it's very dramatic if you say you did.
The first thing to understand is that if you grew up in Nigeria in the early to mid 60s, when I was a youngster, at that time, it meant that you belonged to a generation that was able to see a country that had such incredible promise, and we felt we were masters of the universe, and to see it completely collapse to the point where I was just seeing something on the internet today that Nigeria has the worst vaccination rates on earth. So that transition during your lifetime makes it impossible for you to sleep at night, right? Because you know better. So that was one imperative that had always driven me. I knew what was and what became. The second thing, obviously, was that perhaps more nebulous and less explainable is the idea that you have to, you go all around the world and then you end up back home. There is something there. The idea of next year in Jerusalem, it never happens for most people, right? But sometimes you take that step out of your comfort zone and return. So, but the specific catalyst for me was a couple of events. One was that I was sort of obviously in line to take over running the newspaper in New York, which would have meant that was the end of any aspirations I had about going back to Nigeria. So I had to make a decision whether I wanted to be in that line or not. And the second one was that I became a fellow of the Africa Leadership Initiative, which is part of the Aspen Global Leadership Network. And we gathered here in Aspen in April 2005. And we had just won the Peltz Prize then, and everybody was, drinking too much whiskey as usual. and then it occurred to me that, yeah, this is what I'm going to do now.
I love the moral imperative actually happened because of whiskey.
So I promised the other fellows there that I was going to go back. I'd been thinking of it, obviously. I'd been it's at the back of my mind, but this kind of step requires enormous courage that one does not always have, right? So that was the final push for me, that I was invited into this network, and out of sheer foolishness and hubris, I sort of publicly promised all the fellows that this is what I was going to do. Then, of course, you had to do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's incredible, because a lot of people, I think, might have taken the other road. So it's extraordinary what you did. Nicola, Dele says that word comfort zone. And when I read about you and the work that you've done, you're running a company, you're doing really well, all sorts of things. Youth unemployment, that is an enormous issue, especially in South Africa. Why didn't you say, well, you know what, somebody else is working on it, there are organizations to deal with that? What made you say, I'm going to take this on?
So I think I personally have always, I mean, I grew up in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. So, I mean, I think I also have a personal journey, which gives me a very strong sense of the importance of social justice and the importance of economic justice. And we have a long way to go on economic justice in South Africa. So we have very high inequality and manifested in this youth unemployment problem. So those were kind of values, in a sense, that I carry with me. But working in business, and my inflection moment too, has its roots with a whiskey.
I'm liking this.
Funny, that theme.
It's a good narrative.
The contribution of the Scots to our... but so over a whiskey with two of my fellows who had invited me, so they were running this holding company and building out the next phase of business, and we sort of started to agree to work together to think about how to pivot the whole business, really, to think about how this business could create financial and social value simultaneously with no compromise between the two. And that has become our sort of business philosophy. And we, are very, we're very fierce about our financial results. We, don't make any compromises about them, but we are equally fierce and have an investor mindset with all of our businesses and our initiatives around their achievement of very significant and enduring social impact and social value creation. So together we sort of forged this philosophy and then identified areas of our businesses or our business portfolio that really lent themselves to, that had the capability or the capacity to tackle big social issues. And I think that the why on youth employment was recognizing that actually the economy that we operate in, and in fact that all our businesses operate in, and the world that our businesses operate in, is not sustainable if we are not able to grow the economy more inclusively. We're a business that takes a long-term view on value. So we're a private holding company, not listed. And we're interested in intergenerational wealth. We're interested in intergenerational value creation. And it's not going to work if too many people don't feel vested in the economy, have no stake in the economy, and have no interest in its success. So I think there was a sort of confluence of a set of personal values, a set of business imperatives, if you like, if you took a long-term view, and a set of assets that we knew we could leverage our leadership capital, our businesses, our networks, our resources to make a big change. And we felt the obligation to create a proportional response. We think that business has huge power in society. I mean, second to government, in some countries more than government. Big business has huge power. And so our responses in social impact need to be proportional to that power. And we need to be as ambitious around our social impact as we are around our financial returns.
And the success that you've had is, I love the fact that you are using the existing resources and turning that and working with the unemployment issue. It's really amazing. Casey, was it tequila?
It's rum. No. Panama's always rum.
Oh, sorry. Right, exactly. Casey, my question is similar for you. Why not just stick to real estate and development and what you were doing? What was that moment that you thought, I'm going elsewhere here?
I mean, like Nicola, our business has this sort of triple bottom line mandate and this mandate to look for sustainable solutions. But if I'm perfectly honest, this was a problem I turned the other way from for a long time.
Really? Did it impact your business?
Not enough to motivate me at first. And I wish I could tell you, the day that an 8-year-old kid was shot at my front door, I sprung into action and did something, and that didn't do it. We had bullets go through the window of our various properties. That didn't do it. A lot of people were killed in the neighborhood. What really did it were two things. One, on the personal side, the leadership initiative that Dele mentioned, I also went through. And it's a very interesting process because it's a very introspective process. You do a lot of thinking about your purpose. And one of the things that becomes very clear to you is any gap you have between what you think and what you say and what you actually do. is just laid bare to yourself, and that propels you into action. And then the other thing was that the company, we were finishing a hotel, and we found out the contractor had been paying extortion money to one of the gangs, and so we were about to inherit that problem. And at that point, it became a very direct problem, which did two things. One, it forced us to really look for the sustainable solution, some solution that wasn't building a wall around the hotel, which we couldn't do, and even if would kill the hotel, or just paying the guys off. So we had to look for a sustainable solution to the problem. But also it allowed me to attack the problem using the tools of my business. In other words, it took it from being a tangential kind of, I want to save the world because I really care about, breast cancer, and I'm going to do that with my spare time, to I can take company resources, I can focus them, I can focus it within my day-to-day. So it was right inside, became something right inside the wheelhouse. And that really, I think, for people who are occupied in business, really enables you to leverage a lot more the power you have.
Yeah, that was the word I was looking for, leveraging. Exactly. But of course, what's daunting to me is that you're doing both things at the same time. We're not going to go there for the moment. Dele, so let's get this straight. You give up your job at Newsday, you go back to Nigeria, and you say, okay, I'm going to fight corruption.
I'm here.
Here I am. How do you even begin? And tell us a little bit about what happened with Next.
So a number of things happened, some of them very foolish in retrospect, but this is the beauty of jumping into the fire, right? If you knew how much heat there was, you probably wouldn't.
Were they happy to see you?
You probably wouldn't have the courage to do it. So one of the things that happened, coincidentally, was the aura of the Pulitzer Prize created some security fencing around me. And also a desire for people to want to make friends and be helpful until they saw what was coming, of course. So I had a lot of doors open to me, of course. The president had written me a nice congratulatory letter and all of that stuff.
Nice picture with you.
Right.
Yeah.
So basically I decided, one, that I wanted to raise money only in Nigeria to do this. I wanted to show the Nigerians could do this. And then we were going to recruit all of these young people and train them. And so we went through a very elaborate process of recruiting and training. That took us an entire year, sifting from like 13,000 applicants to eventually about 90 or 100 people that we hired initially. So everything was being done with also the power of symbolism in mind. So we hired the world's best newspaper designer, Mario Garcia, who had redesigned The Observer in London and El País and Wall Street Journal and so on and so forth. So he designed the newspaper. I was sending a message to people that you didn't have to compromise on being the best in the world. And so the people responded to this, all these young people. Young people are an amazing lot. And Africa has the world's youngest population, as you know, so I'm moderately optimistic that we'll go in the right direction. But they responded, and more importantly, the idea that you could do this without accepting what they call brown envelopes, where people had put in some cash and so on.
Exactly what you were trying to fight.
Right, so that was very powerful part. The ethical part was very powerful component of the training program. And then, of course, I had to demonstrate that myself. So I conducted myself in a way that was very clear that we were not going to compromise on that. And so one of the biggest things, and one of hopefully the more lasting things we achieved, I think, was the idea of pride in doing the right thing amongst all of these young people who now dominate the civic conversation in the whole of the country today. So we were building it step by step in that fashion, but a number of our operating assumptions turned out in retrospect to be wrong. One was that if you presented people with facts unadulterated, that they will respond accordingly and use the information to change their lives. That is not true. That proved to be untrue. I was very disappointed to find that out because I'm a romantic and expect the best in people and so on. But that's completely untrue. facts are not enough. And sometimes when people are very desperately trying to survive, they don't pay attention to all these sort of fancy things that you think you're doing for them. The second thing was that turned out to be a wrong assumption, was that the conduct of leaders, either political, in politics or in business, the political and business elites, that if we shone this extremely bright light on their conduct, which is a horrific conduct in many ways, that people will be so embarrassed that they will start changing their behavior and the way they handle things and so on. That proved to be also completely incorrect. People don't change simply because you embarrass them, or at least they don't change all the time because you shone lights on them. What did happen, though, was that a number of things kept us going. We unexpectedly had fairly strong, instant, dramatic responses to some things, such as getting the Constitution to be recognized and changing the sick president and allowing the deputy to take over the government, rather than his wife running the country from the bedroom and pretending it was her husband giving the instructions, right? So you achieve that sort of thing and you say, oh, okay, it's not all a question of failure. And then you try another thing and so on. But most of the time, we were not getting the kind of what we thought was obvious responses that we should get from society. So the question then that people like us have to face is, how do you stay in this sort of fight for the long haul and not get burnt out very quickly? One of my great weaknesses is the charging fully ahead, and if things were not really happening, you just sort of burn yourself out. So I'm learning now in my eldership to pace myself a little bit better. But it was quite a thing. It was quite a thing.
I'm sure we'll talk about it a little later. It sounds like there were numerous lessons learned out of this whole experience. But Nicola, I'm curious because Dele speaks about the challenges, right? You don't just have one of these ideas and have a moment and go do it. What were the challenges, or what are the challenges that you face?
So tackling youth unemployment at a sort of population level requires a kind of coalition of the willing between business and employers, young people, and the government. And so at each stage of this journey, we've had to think about what it takes to build, sustain, and grow a coalition of the willing, and translate that from intent to action by all those players. And action means, doing things at a very practical level. This is not check writing. Check writing is easy peasy. That is the easiest thing, especially if you've got money, right?
Yeah, that definitely makes the check easy.
Generally makes checks pretty easy and very feel good and all that. Changing things that require, changing my own behavior, changing my expectations, changing the way I make decisions, being able to take some risk on. These are things and we needed employers, government, and young people to do all of those things. So I think that the challenges started, we knew that we had to create a demonstration effect with our own businesses. There was no way we could even earn although we had the power, we couldn't earn the right to actually be a change leader in the space if we couldn't demonstrate that we were doing it ourselves. So we set about engaging with our executive teams across our portfolio on, why were they not hiring unemployed young people? What were the risks they were sensing? We had like a year-long process of a sort of strategy development process of diagnostic and solution creation around, because our constant question was, because they just kept giving us 20 reasons why it couldn't be done. Mm-hmm. And we just said, let's figure out how to do it. We have a lot of areas of business where we say it can't be done, and then we figure out ways to do it because there's value to be created. Let's do that here too. And by the end of that year, we had some of our businesses who compete with each other, by the way, which was a really helpful thing, able to be a demonstration effect that you could create a pre-competitive solution to solving a problem, but we knew it couldn't work at even this group of firms level. So we started to use our businesses as early adopters to be peer champions, effectively, with other businesses. Today, Harambee has 350 employer partners. Pretty much 80% of the listed companies in South Africa have partnered with Harambee in one way or another. And the challenges in that process were massive and are every day. In other words, there's a constant change of leadership. There's a new process. Business is going through a new cycle. And at each one of those moments, executives in businesses will go through the inflection point of having to say, is this inclusive hiring thing important to my business? Is it something I'm going to stick with even though I'm going through a down cycle? And so the process of engaging business executives on an ongoing basis is one of the leadership challenges. And then you have to have the humility to understand that CEOs make decisions, but they don't make anything happen in their organizations. And they can't make anything happen in their organizations generally. Certainly not things that involve entry-level hiring. So you have to be able to work at multiple levels across the ecosystem, and that requires probably the most fundamental value we have about change, which is having a low ego. You have to have a very low ego in these processes. You have to want to talk with, engage with, respect, and understand everybody in a system and how this change, what sense it makes to them, what might motivate them to do it, why would they do it? Why would a junior manager in a big corporate want to put the effort in? A young person gets and keeps a job because a manager loves them. That's really what happens, right? If it's your first job, someone's got to love you for you to succeed. And that's a junior manager usually. So being able to work at all these levels, we've created a kind of army of champions, really. Champions in businesses, champions in organizations. Then getting young people into the process is very challenging. We have a big trust deficit. Young people have been scammed to death. They're constantly sold opportunities that are unreal. And so we had to, do a lot of hard yards to create enough. Young people had to get line of sight of other young people succeeding to build a brand that young people actually
infectious,
trusted.
I would imagine.
Yeah, and it had to become a brand. And in fact, we were very proud, completely independently of us, a brand agency that does a sort of annual study on brands in South Africa, did a study, and Harambee came up in the category of households that are sort of low-income households in South Africa. The brand came up in the top 10 brands in those households.
That's great.
Alongside, ahead of some of the Unilever brands, ahead of some of our telco brands, and behind Nike and Coke.
That's amazing.
So we were like, that's a proper brand with young people.
That's great.
And so these are challenges but the thing is that you kind of have to treat it like you would a business, which is that you have to say, it's a solution we need to find. There's a market we need, and that market is employers, it's young people. Government, we found the trust deficit between government and business is huge. But government loves success that speaks to their political ambition. And I think if you can align what you're doing to what everybody needs for success, then you can get all the partners on board.
Casey, let me ask you, because Nicola speaks about these inflection moments and these points where you're being told no, you're running up against all these challenges. Was there a moment, or were there many moments where you said, what am I doing here? Let me just go back and build another hotel and get out of this business?
Every day.
Every day.
Every day. Yeah, I mean, our big challenge, the fundamental challenge that we have is that they do surveys all over Latin America, and they say, what do you think is the best solution to crime? Repression, jails, police, or is it a social solution? Overwhelmingly, 75%, it's repression and jails. So that 25%, you find them, the interesting thing is you find them everywhere. So while that's the big challenge, is breaking the mentality and getting people to understand that repression in jails just makes these problems worse. It turns a street gang, by pulling them apart and putting them in jail, they get more sophisticated, and their command and control gets all much more sophisticated, and they become what you didn't want them to be because of your actions. But there's 25% that understand that, and you find them in police, and you find them in industry, and you find that 25% everywhere. And that's the sort of band of brothers that keeps you going, because you know that this is the right way, The other challenge is we don't know what we're doing. So nobody's ever done this before. We certainly, we're business, so we're just figuring it out all and making mistakes all the time and getting ourselves into all sorts of messes. We've had enough success that we really believe it's the right approach, but the very specific bits of the model just keep changing and being, so that's a huge challenge.
I want to go to question and answers from everybody here, but I'm going to put somebody on the spot, Ann McNulty.
Yeah.
Sorry to do this to you, but first of all, thank you for what you do in your leadership, because what they're doing is just extraordinary. And I would love to, I'd love to ask you, Anne, why, of all the things that you could have done, why you decided to really honor innovation and this concept of change.
Well, thank you, Penny, and this has been a great panel. So I do want to share with you that, I'll move this way. For us, the McNulty Prize is a very joyful family enterprise. And so we have here today my son, Johnny, from New York, and my daughter, Bryn, who's come all the way from Bogota. And my youngest son, Kevin, who's allegedly working, is texting me saying, how's the panel going and what's going on? So for all of us, this has been a great enterprise. And as Eric alluded to, where this started was that, with my husband, John, and honoring his legacy of leadership. Now, John was a person of great energy and charisma, and he had this unique ability to get people, to challenge people to step up. And so he himself decided to leave his post on the management committee at Goldman Sachs at age 48 and pivot to try to create opportunities for others. And sadly, just a few years later, he died suddenly, giving us the challenge of how do we continue to recognize those kind of values. So the prize was created with the Aspen Institute to honor leaders such as we have here today who have decided to pivot and use their talents and skills and wisdom to solve problems and create opportunities for others. So it has been 10 years. It's been a really incredible 10 years. We've had 34 laureates like these three brilliant ones on the stage. And through them, we have figured out kind of how to not only recognize and continue John's values, but amplify them. And so part of our mission now is really telling the stories. And we've gotten better. Not only this panel is a great example of trying to tell the stories, and then I'll do our commercial on our website, McNultyPrize.org. We actually have been writing case studies to really explain who these people are and the amazing, amazing things we're doing. So I encourage you to ask some questions and also follow up with any of them. And April Lodge, the director of our foundation, is here, who has been very involved in telling these stories. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for what you do. I'd love to take a few questions and then give our panelists an opportunity to tell you what they're working on now, as if this isn't enough. Who has a question for any of our panelists? Yes, right here. There's a microphone on its way.
I'm sure you've run into people, each one of you, who were already stakeholders in whatever you were trying to attack, and they were older and they had gray hair that looked more like me, and they told you, oh no, this is the way it's got to be. This is the way it is, and you should just fit into my model for what you should be doing, and if you're willing to do that, then we could work together. What was that like? How did you react to that?
Casey, let me let you try to respond to that.
So those years that I was looking the other way, there was actually a government program operating. I was very critical of that program. I participated in it, and we gave jobs to the guys that they were supposedly training. But the whole time I was saying to myself, we could do this better, we could do this better.
That's where I would have left it, just complaining about them.
And I probably would have had those two things I mentioned not happened. And I probably would have just stuck with their structure and said, well, they're the government and they should know best. And, maybe I know better, but I'm not going to go do it myself. But those, things changed, and I had to do it.
Great. Anybody else want to respond?
It's fairly similar.
Yes, over here. Microphone is right there.
I'm curious, and you just said at times you know how to do it better, or you feel that you have enough information to know that maybe we should do it that way. So And because the panel is really about the moral impulse, I'd like to hear you on how do you continue, to share your work without becoming moralistic with people who are not on board. So you're triggered by a moral impulse, but how do you make sure that you're not moralistic in your approach?
Well, I mean, it depends on the scale of the challenge you're facing, the difficulty rating, and whether you even have the mind to consider some of those things, which maybe you see more clearly in retrospect. But really, when you are in the battle, you are not thinking too much about whether somebody thinks you're being moralistic and so on. The important thing, though, is I find that you have to leave room for others to help shape what they think is the best way to do it. Some of us have more difficulty than others in doing that. But I would imagine what I know of Nicola, she's probably more adept at this sort of thing than I am. So you figure out what the environment you are in requires, and then you just plunge ahead and you do what you have to do. But I get your point about not putting people off. But the work that I was doing was actually designed to put people off. So I wouldn't have thought too much about what you asked.
So my strategy is more to mobilize people around common cause and to excite people about a result that we're trying to achieve. And then to understand that, the different players in that, in achieving that result have different reasons for being there and have different measures of success for themselves and for the process. And I think that while what I do might be driven by some sense of values or moral imperative, my modus operandi is strategic, results-focused, very disciplined kind of process of getting stuff done, show success, get everybody excited about success, mobilize the next lot. So it's not really about preaching. I don't find that to be very effective when you have to get people to change behaviors that are very entrenched, and they're not entrenched. They're entrenched because of interests, and which means that they are deep. People are behaving in a certain way because that's what drives their bonuses, because that's the context in which they live or are surviving. In the case of the young people, is determining their choice architecture and what is available. So I don't judge people for how they're behaving. I'm just trying to figure out how to change the way we're behaving.
I just add to that. I think that's a real issue, and I find it more comfortable, although I'd be dishonest to say I don't feel that there is a moral impulse to do the thing you think is the right thing. I feel much more comfortable when I just say, hey, look, it's in my economic long-term best interest to resolve this sustainably. It's just a much easier way to avoid that problem.
Is it true that gang members now come to your program and ask to be let in?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that that world information flies very quickly, and those guys actually, we don't approach gangs and say, hey, would you guys like to change your behavior?
Yeah, that go over big.
Our social workers are out there all the time, and they approach and they say, but normally they have their highs and lows, and when they hit low because the police are pounding on them, they've done something probably normally terrible, and they want to kind of like put all that behind, they come to us and say, we want our turn.
It's amazing, amazing. All right, let's have one last question over there, behind you.
As I hear the impressive stories that you're telling, what comes to mind is the desire for more people to be doing what you're doing. If you think about yourselves and the traits and characteristics or early family or education experiences you had that really fed into what you're doing and made a difference, what would you say is imperative for us to be doing in schools, at home with the young of today in order to make sure that the next generation have the same sort of approach to social change as you do?
That's a great question. How do we encourage the moral imperative to change?
I think by example is the number one thing, and by constantly engaging young people in whatever it is you're trying to do affect positive change in society. I mean, the way it happened for me when I was growing up was that was just what was expected. But the world was more ordered then. And young people today live in a far more fluid environment, and it's much tougher to have a grasp on things. So one has to kind of keep that in mind in approaching them. I mean, we have raging arguments, my wife and I, with our 2 young adult daughters. They say we just don't get it, right? But so for them, they are lucky because they are just automatically doing the kind of things we did 40 years ago and thinking that we had become obsolete. But most young people actually across the world do not have that kind of opportunity of a structured environment in which they just slip into something. It's like reading, right? It's your parents read, so you read. And that's how these things are perpetuated. So that sort of thinking also has to go into how to inspire young people today to get involved in the affairs of the commons and not just go off in their own little silos and pursuits.
Yeah, quickly.
I mean, I think one of the most important drivers is empathy. And I think that the way you get empathy is by exposure to other people in other contexts and that aren't your own. And I think that it's a huge challenge that, I mean, now kids are living even more in their echo chambers and more in their social networks than they ever have before. I mean, we have this fantasy that we've broken out of our social networks, but in fact, they reinforce our social networks. So I think that this issue of kind of just having exposure and being immersed in other people's worlds, and understanding that people around us are not, I think also just breaking the mindset of that everybody who's not making it is a charity job, I think is a really important shift. I think particularly in a country like America, actually, where historically social mobility was so real that, you know, maybe I could get that. But now social mobility is a real challenge here. Well, you can't take that view. You can't take the view that people aren't succeeding for that reason. So I just think that there's quite a lot of challenge around how people experience their fellow countrymen.
I want to have, in the few remaining minutes that we have left, I want to hear what you are all working on next. But first, Dele, I want to ask you, end the story about what happened with Next before you tell us what you're doing next.
Okay, so eventually they figured us out. So in Nigeria, and I suppose in many other, sort of unstable third world countries, the first attempt is to befriend you, in the hope that you will treat them specially. And if that doesn't work, then they try to bribe you. And if that doesn't work, they try to cut off your oxygen supply, which means destroy your business. And if that doesn't work, then they'll shoot you. Luckily, they succeeded at the third stage. so
we're happy about that, too.
So they cut off advertising lines. They scared advertisers away. They got the bank to pull the loan. They did all kinds of things until we could no longer continue. And an interesting thing that then happened there, which leads to what I'm doing next, is just as we were collapsing was when I won the McNulty Prize in 2011. Right. And it couldn't stave off the collapse, but it did something that I have thought about quite a bit, which was that when I sort of became disinterested in things, because this was a very intense project that took a lot out of you, emotional toll and so on, and I'd lost interest in everything. But Anne was always inviting me to everything. So now, partly out of guilt and partly because I would come out of this anyway eventually, I started asking myself the question, what do I really want to do for the next 35 years? And I say 35 years because my father lived till he was 93, and I figure I probably have roughly that. And he also drank whiskey, so that shouldn't have any negative impact. So it was the question of what do you do, really? What do you love to do that you can do for the next 35 years? And the answer revealed itself to me, which is to go back to my first love, which is the space of ideas, of writing, of journalism, of convening people to talk about ideas that can drive society forward. So my next project then is to move from the ground zero where we were in a specific country to maybe 5,000 to 10,000 feet where we can see more clearly what the forces were that are pushing society to behave in the way they're doing, and hopefully to illuminate that for people who are in a position to do something about it. So working on a long-form journalism platform that focuses on the African world, which we hope in the next 6 to 9 months will be formally launched. And then I can structure it in a way that it allows me to do at least one big piece a year so that I can rejuvenate myself in the things that I think I would love to be doing.
Sounds wonderful.
So that's what I'm working on next. Partly out of guilt, and partly because I knew I was going to come out of this anyway eventually and stop the dabbling that I'd been doing. Yeah.
Nicola, what are you working on?
So we like to be social innovators, so we're always thinking of the next things. And so on the youth employment side, we're building out our next generation of our tech platform so that we can scale the model across multiple African cities and possibly elsewhere in the globe where it might have applicability. And we've innovated in that same period of time several other big social enterprises and ecosystems that we're influencing, early learning, through our financial services businesses focusing on the financial resilience of low-income households, and the improving performance in public schooling. So we have several large-scale sort of ecosystem initiatives that we're working on.
That's all.
That's all.
I'm joking. Casey, how
and our
about you?
businesses.
So we're working on learning from our errors and failures. We've intervened 4 different groups. 3 were very successful. The 4th one, we went a little bit outside of our community, and it was almost a total failure. Very low rates of job placement. Guys went straight back to jail. So what we learned from that was that we had tried to go to a neighborhood that there wasn't change around it. We didn't understand how important the change happening around the other 3 groups, the context, because we were building, there were jobs, there were people coming in and integrating and interacting with the guys. So what we've done is we've put together a coalition of NGOs, and we're now moving into neighborhoods. We're bringing big investments into the neighborhoods, but we're also bringing in a coalition of NGOs and a transversal leadership program, not too dissimilar from the AGLN program, to build leaders from the ground. So we've gotten much more complicated, but I think we've learned a little bit why we were succeeding that we didn't understand before.
So I would say good luck to you, but something tells me you don't need good luck. But I will say thank you for inspiring all of us today and for the incredible work that you do. Ladies and gentlemen, the McNulty Prize laureates.